Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about nudge theory, and so we're going to hopefully educate you a little bit about this and what it's all about, and then turn to apply that to the world of security awareness. And I really want to almost challenge the way that we're doing security awareness at the moment, based on the behavioural science behind nudge theory, and question whether what we're doing is really working and why we maybe want to try something a little bit different. So what on earth is nudge theory? So some of you may have read the book called Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein. It's essentially about economics, and it's based very much on Kahneman and Tversky's thinking around how the brain works, and Thinking Fast and Slow, another very good book by Kahneman. And the idea is that you can take drastic kind of forcing approaches to try and change people's behaviours, and that's how we've tended to do it in the past. Or nudge theory is about kind of gently nudging and helping people to make the right decision. They call them soft paternalistic nudges. You're not being forced to do something, you're being steered in the right direction. So an example might be, you need your children to tidy their room. You can shout at them and say, tidy your room, or you can play a tidy up game. And which is going to be more effective, and which is going to get and prevent that kind of, no, I'm not doing that. Or maybe if you're worried about health, you can do calorie counting, which is hard work, and it's kind of a real change. You have to make yourself do it. Or you can start eating off a smaller plate. And maybe budgeting is quite a difficult thing, but instead of that, maybe when you go to the supermarket, use a basket instead of a trolley. And what you're doing here is you're changing the environment around things, and it steers you into making a decision in a different way. So there's this idea of choice architecture, which is really important, and I'll come back to this, but choice architecture exists whether we change it or not, and I'll show you some examples of that later. And the reason this works is this concept of limited rationality. So we used to think that we all made really deliberative, thought-through decisions, trying to maximise our gains and minimise losses. The reality is we don't always make decisions like that. And so Kahneman and Tversky were thinking about, well, why is that? And the idea behind this is that quite a lot of the time, our brain has got a lot of information to process, and it takes shortcuts, and it uses cognitive biases. And the problem, and why this is relevant to cybersecurity, is that the bad guys know about these cognitive biases. And that's what you see in phishing lures, things like authority, urgency, all those things that make you think without thinking. So limited rationality is why nudge theory works, and it's really driven by context. So we are very much controlled by the context within which we're in. We see cues, and that makes us think and make decisions in a particular way. So choice architecture exists whether we change it or not. And so the first main point is, you are communicating with your people anyway. You might as well do better communication by thinking about these behavioural theories and putting them into your communications. And I'll come on to what that actually looks like. So what does nudge theory look like? Well, supermarket. You go to the supermarket, there has to be something on that shelf at eye level. And the supermarkets are thinking very, very hard about what that product is. The products they know you're going to come in and find because they're staples, you've got to buy them, they'll put that on the bottom shelf because you'll search for that. But the stuff they want you to buy, that's going to be at your eye level. There's always got to be something right next to the till. That could be a healthy choice, water, fruit, or it could be chocolate. And the same is true in a school canteen. If you want children to eat more healthily, then changing the layout, changing the way that people have sort of offered the food to people, using good, interesting names in the food, can really affect and has measurably affected whether people eat healthy or not. There's been some interesting things where trying to encourage people to save, putting a face of a loved one or the thing you're saving from on the envelope can be influential in whether you save and whether you take that money back out of that pot that you put it into. Lots of examples in hand washing, both in the NHS, a really interesting one in an abattoir in Chile, where they were concerned that people weren't washing their hands enough. So at the beginning of each break, they stamped a picture in ink of a germ on their hands. And then, but it was really effective because you also had social proof. So if people hadn't washed their hands thoroughly before they went back onto the floor, everyone else could see that stamp on their hands and was really effective. Some visual examples, so trying to get people not to litter, so get them to rote, probably quite topical if we're in a football stadium. Embarrassing confession here, if you're into nudge theory, then when you see something like this in a men's urinal, you have to take a photo. Luckily, no one came in while I was doing this, but essentially that is a tiny little football goal in a urinal, and this is meant to make men aim directly. Why they can't anyway, I don't know. But one of the first ever examples of a nudge was a fly in a urinal in Amsterdam airport. You'll all see this when you're in London, going up and down the escalators, and when you're crossing roads, look left, look right. It is really important to get your nudges right, because otherwise they could be potentially fatal. I think this is a real photo. I personally didn't doctor it. I think it is actually real. Excellent. So lots of examples. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but one of the first models that the government sort of academics came up with around nudge theory was called mind space. Google on this, it's on the internet, but the idea was that these 9 different things influence the way that we behave. Now, when you're writing some comms, you obviously don't need to think about all of them, but there's some really important things in here, like who's the messenger? The authority that messenger has will really influence us. We like to go with the flow. One of the most famous nudge theory things is this idea of opt-in pension, so pensions that you're put into, and you have to actively opt out of them. The same with donor cards, and that can influence our behaviour because we're all quite lazy, so we don't bother opting out. Salience is important, so things that catch our attention are novel and new, and I'll come back to that one as well. But also we can prime people. So Devon Brown is doing this, obviously, when he does his tricks on people, but you can prime people to be thinking about things, and we can use that in awareness. So that was obviously far too complicated a model, so the government kind of did some more research and said, no, we need 4 letters in our acronym, so they came up with EAST, the EAST model. So this says that a good nudge is an easy behaviour, an attractive behaviour, something you want to do, something social, other people are doing it. So if things are social and you see other people doing it, you kind of want to join in and do that too. Really, really importantly, timely. It has to be close to the point of risk and when it really matters, that opportune moment, and I'll come back to that as well. I'm collecting lots of things to come back to, aren't I? So let's start really simply. How do we apply that? And you're communicating anyway. So try and use some of these things in the messages you're using. If you're sending people emails, you're doing comms, think a bit more carefully about how you're going to structure that. Maybe just have a quick whiz through Mindspace. Could I use 1 or 2 of these things in this message? But there are other things as well. So other heuristics. Reciprocity is a great one. If I give you something, then you kind of feel slightly obliged to give something back to me. So we could highlight that in our comms, for example. The security team have done this much to protect you. Could you do your bit by reporting? Really interesting example, it's not cybersecurity, and this is from another good book called Ripple by Groom and Vellacott. So Tesco Delivery Saver, these slight tweaks to an email they were already using gave them a 10% uplift. And if you're the size of Tesco and 10% more people sign up to your Delivery Saver at £7 a month, that's quite a lot of money. So firstly, they frame the whole thing as a loss. Don't miss out on this. And you'll see this across all sorts of marketing. Don't miss out on this opportunity, that's scarcity. Then they had this lovely friendly delivery driver. I love this idea of a hot state of receiving groceries, but the idea that we enjoy being given a gift, so that was good. Smiling face, we mimic that positivity. And they were looking towards the key message, so drawing your eye towards the message, which was that delivery savers save. And then this really precise number, it's quite strange that gives us authority. Well, if it just said roughly £75, you're like, yeah, right, what will it save me? That precise number makes us think. And you're all thinking here, nah, I wouldn't be influenced by this. But it works. It gave them a 10% uplift with these little tweaks in an email they were sending anyway, so why not do it? So if we're going to do this, I talked about timeliness earlier. When are we going to do it and how are we doing it? And again, I'll come to another behavioural model by B.J. Fogg. He does some great books. Tiny Habits is a particularly good book by him on this behaviour models and about how you encourage yourself to do behaviours. And first he says that there's an element of motivation to any behaviour. Then there's an element of ability. Can I do it? And finally, some sort of prompt. And he draws this on a graph that's basically saying, as long as you've got, you're kind of past this line in terms of your ability or your willingness, your motivation, and then the prompt comes, you'll probably behave. And so you can obviously think about this like, if you're really motivated, really willing, you can do really hard things. If you're not particularly motivated, things have to be easy. So where do secure behaviours and getting your staff to act? It's probably here. People aren't particularly motivated, so if we want them across that line, they need to be really able. It needs to be really easy to do the behaviour. And that's not because people aren't motivated to act securely, it's more that they've got a whole load of other competing motivations, they've got to hit targets, and so acting securely is probably low down their list. So you've got to make it easy. The other really interesting thing Fogg highlights is that order matters. So in the industry, we've always focused very much on motivation. Let's scare people into acting. Fogg says that you actually need the reverse order here. Start with the prompt. And it kind of makes sense. If you could just gently nudge someone to act in a way, and you don't need to worry about motivation and ability, and you get the action, well, you can stop there. If the nudge isn't enough, then ability, and then finally turn to motivation. A great example I like there is in terms of keeping fit. So you want to go for a run the next morning, you put your kit ready next to the bed. So you wake up, that's the nudge. You see it. If you put it on, it's really easy. Now, nothing is stopping you going for the run, and all you need is motivation. Now, I have walked around the house in my kit all day. However, that was just the final step that was needed. Everything else has been lined up to make that happen. So let's look at applying that again and look at some real examples in your security awareness, perhaps thinking about secure behaviours around phishing and emails. So as Fogg says, let's start with the prompt. So what's the timely moment to help people? Well, obviously, it's while they're in their email. So if you've got a reporting button, that's a good start. That's something that's visible in their email. And so are those banners on emails coming in. This is external. It helps you highlight that this is something to worry about. Slight issue with those is habituation. So after a while, your brain stops seeing that piece of the screen because it's there all the time. So you do need to think about changing and mixing things up. So just as simple as trying to persuade your IT team, and I know this isn't easy because even getting that banner on in the first place could be hard, could you change the colour of that banner every 3 to 6 months? Because then it goes back to that salience point I talked about. It pops back up in your brain and you go, oh, this is something new, I'll bother looking at it. Then we think about ability. So try and help people with the ability of spotting phishing. Now, increasingly, as Sarah was talking about with AI, the sophistication of these emails in a phishing context is going to get better and better. So don't overcomplicate it with all this. It's going to be bad spelling and grammar and look at the URL and look at for different cases and syntaxes and stuff. And people aren't going to get that. Experts aren't necessarily going to spot that. Focus on the really obvious things that should be in any phishing email, which is manipulation. There's always going to be something where they're trying to get you to do something that's out of process or it's just not going to feel quite right in the context. That's the thing to be focusing on. And then make it easy to act. So a nice, simple message. If it doesn't feel right, report it. And then we can turn to motivation. And obviously, this is a tricky problem. So we're probably going to have to do all of these. But if we can help people with just a prompt, why not? So the motivation, you're trying to help them think about the threat appraisal, understand that phishing's a risk. You can do some really good stuff here around social proof and reciprocity. So kind of, we blocked this much, have you done your bit? Or your colleagues are reporting, are you reporting? So what could that look like? So this is some research we did with Cardiff University, really simple. As people opened their inbox, they got this nudge just once, and it had a significant impact in whether they then spotted phishing in their inbox. They thought they were doing an email sorting task. We gave them a little nudge like this. This one has got some of that psychology in it. So the first bit is highlighting threat. The last phrase is meant to counter their optimism bias, this idea that everyone thinks, well, it's not going to happen to me, so highlighting, your inbox is at equal risk to others. Very subtle. You don't do this all the time. You just do this once, maybe once a month. Or if you're running a behavioural campaign, you might start with a bit of content explaining it, then you might do a nudge like this. So pulling all of that together and the theory, every behaviour we make and all our staff make takes place in a context, mostly on our IT. There's going to be some sort of trigger, and then we're going to act. And we've been trying to solve this problem in completely the wrong place. Security awareness done once a year, yes, maybe it's better than that now, maybe it's quarterly or something like that. It's not where the threat lies. It's out of context. It's very likely to be forgotten by the time you get to the point. And when you go back to that limited rationality point of we're not actually thinking, we're automatically responding, then telling people to stop and think and teaching them doesn't really work because skills and knowledge aren't always being applied at the point someone clicks. Their brain is taking a shortcut going, oh, it's the CEO, click. They're not actually thinking. So telling everyone stop and think doesn't really do anything. And then, of course, we've got stuff on this side that is potentially a little bit too late. Phishing simulations, yes, it will give you an indication of potentially who's likely to click, although you can pretty much get whichever click rate you want, depending on how hard you make it. And all you can really do at this point is punish people with training. Now, it might not feel like you're doing that, and you can probably land it a bit more gently, but that tends to be how people feel it is. And there are tools also looking at events in the scene, but they're still in this kind of after-the-fact punishment with training. So there's two sweet spots, really. One is here, in the context where the threat lies, priming people so that they're aware that this is a thing. So you open your email, just a little nudge to say, phishing happens in your inbox. Okay, so now I'm slightly more primed, I'm going to be more likely to spot something. Very subtle, you're not doing it all the time because then you get nudge fatigue. But even more exciting, delivering something here. At the point someone's doing something potentially risky, so they're about to click a link, or maybe they have clicked a link and they're about to type in their password. Maybe they're about to upload a file. If you can intervene at that point, you can also measure, so you can get a baseline. How often does that thing happen? And then you can start intervening and see, am I actually changing behavior? So you've got all this idea of timeliness that we talked about before. You're in the context where the threat lies, and that's when you can also make sure the messaging is as effective as possible with these psychological constructs. That is what we do with red flags at ThinkCyber, so please do come and talk to us on our stand if you want to find out more about that. But I want to show you some examples of what it can really look like. So here's an example, about to click a link, a little nudge to say, you sure you know this person? And drawing my eye to where I need to look. So about embedding that behavior and that good practice, but knocking people out of their System 1 autopilot into just going, oh, am I sure? But you could take that a little bit further. So if I actually click that link, and we find that in many phishing tests, you might have a low click rate, but once you've got them and they click, you get about 80% people give away their credentials. Maybe nudge them at the point they start entering a password when they get to a web page. Uploading files to the internet, this is actually a very generic nudge, so you would want to tune this to the organization in terms of, at this organization, this is the tool we want you to use. This is how to raise an exception, and you're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing. A really simple one, but it is a data breach if you share a distribution list with a bunch of people instead of putting it in BCC, so why not educate people around this as well? Shadow IT, a real problem, very hard to manage unless you just block everything and any website has to be signed off, but that's quite a draconian approach. So why not nudge people when you see them putting their corporate email address in? Maybe nudge them around credential stuffing and helping them understand the risk of that. A few sort of DLP-related things as well. And everyone's favourite, going to ChatGPT. I'm sure you've all got policies and everyone's been sent it and they've all ticked to say they've read it. They probably haven't. Certainly not going to remember it. Why not nudge them at the point they're actually going to ChatGPT? Or even at the point maybe they fill the paste buffer and are about to paste something into ChatGPT. So very quick final observations. We don't always make rational decisions, and unfortunately that means that a traditional approach of just expecting people to have knowledge and skills equaling behavior doesn't really work. Nudging, in fact, is about this choice architecture. So the architecture exists. We are there on a computer. The architecture is already influencing our behavior in particular ways. Why don't we influence it in positive ways? There's some really good models out there that you can use to help you think about this when you're writing your comms. But really importantly, timeliness and context are really important to how people actually behave. If we are going to do these real-time interventions, and I had to cut some slides about this because otherwise it'd go on forever, you need to do this in a nice way. It's not about telling people off. It's got to be gentle, supportive. It's not nagging, it's nudging. It's a gentle push in the right direction. Make it as measurable as you can. Going back to the previous talk, you want to be able to say, right, I've changed behavior. I've had a measurable impact. So taking this nudge to its logical conclusion, you really want to be there on the device offering a tap on the shoulder. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. Well done on time. I think we've got time for one question. Oh, gosh, we've got lots of questions. Go on, Tim, pick one.
Yeah. Very interesting. I'm not sure I know of any. No. Quick answer to that one. I mean, I know you could be thinking about how you tune the messaging, so it's more in tune with what will be received. And there's some stuff you can do looking at the, excuse me, even like the Big Five model of, like, if people are sort of outgoing, then they'll respond to images about outgoing things, and if they're not, then they'll respond to kind of more sort of, so you can tune your comms and your imagery to attract different brain types. I'm not sure how much research there is on how effective that is, though. Great question. That's one we ought to do.
So thanks, Tim. So you're going to be in the exhibition area because
Yes.
there are a few more people with questions. So please go and
please come
find
and have a chat.
Tim in a break. But thank you, Tim.
Yeah, cheers.
Thank you
Thanks
very
much.
much.
Thank you.